boys, Ginny Cutler.
Or Danny is like the head of Visual Right, top guy.
Madam Toastmaster, fellow cardinals and guests. I had 3 children a very long time ago, and I'm slightly ashamed to admit I didn't really listen to anything they said. So 30 odd years later, when the grandchildren came along, I wasn't quite so busy, and I decided to listen to what they said. 3 young boys. In fact, they started doing and saying such extraordinary things that I created a blog. And I've been keeping a blog for about 12 years of their misadventures. And I've just picked 3 of these stories, the least shocking stories you'll be glad to know, because Toastmasters doesn't like shocking stuff. And most of what the boys do is pretty shocking. I've chosen 3 not shocking stories, all connected by schools and ending up with running away. Now, the first story took place 10 years ago when the twins, my daughter, I should tell you, my daughter has 2 boys, twins who are nearly 12 and a 10-year-old, Tom, who's nearly 10. So this was 10 years ago, and we'd been playing a game called Guess How Old They Are. You know, it's what grandmothers do. Are they about 5 or about 20 or about 50 or 100? And the boys had got really good at this. And then quite soon after this game, I had to go and fetch them from school in Amersham, the twins. Tom was only 2 and a half, and he ran off because he's not allowed to go in a pushchair. My daughter's quite strict about that. And I started chatting with this much younger woman, and suddenly Max and Jack, the twin, burst out of school, said, "Hello, Omar," looked to the woman next to me and said, "I think you're about 35 because you look about the same age as my mum." And then he looked at her baby and said, "I think your baby looks about 2 and a half and it should not be in a pushchair. It'll get fat and make it walk." I just nearly died. And I said, "Tom, Max, Jack, whatever, I suspect they live about 5 miles away. You can't make a 2-and-a-half-year-old walk 5 miles. Even Tom can't walk that." And we ran. Then last summer, Antonia came over. They live in Cyprus. She had to come over and buy some school uniform. I don't quite know why. But we've got a John Lewis near us, and she went to John Lewis. And the boys needed lots of stuff, the twins, but Tom didn't. So Tom, who's quite a grown-up 9-year-old, he was 8 then, said, "Mum, I'm really bored with Max and Jack buying school clothes. Can I just go off and just wander around the shop? And I'll meet you down where the Easter eggs are at exactly 12 o'clock. And Antonia, who's quite sort of okay about all this sort of thing, said, "Yes, all right, Tom, off you go. Just promise to be there at 12 o'clock. So she went and bought all their school uniform and came down to the Easter egg thing. And sure enough, as she came down the escalator with the boys full of parcels, there was Tom saying, "Come on, come on." And she was thinking, you know, it's 5 to 12, I'm not late. Being told off by her 8-year-old. And when she got there, he said, "Come on, Mum, walk a bit faster. Come on, come on." She said, "I can't, I've got all these parcels." And Max and Jack, the twins, said, "Mum, I think you ought to listen to Tom. He sounds jolly serious." So she said, "Okay, you've got to help me carry all these parcels." And they ran out of the shop. And she said, "Now, Tom, what's this all about?" And he said, "Wait till we get in the car." And they ran to the car when all the doors were shut. She said, "Tom, what was that all about?" And he said, "Oh, I had such a good time in John Lewis. I went up to the clock department and I made every single clock have the alarm to go off at 12 o'clock. I thought you might like not to be in the shop at the time." Oh, Antonia turned on the ignition, put her foot down and raced out of the car park with her boys. The last story is a bit more serious. They've been out living abroad in Germany and Cyprus for the last 8 years, and I'm sure you all know how impossible it is to get into a school in this country. It is practically impossible, especially when you don't have an address. Anyway, they have to do this. And despite my daughter's husband actually having quite a prestigious job, he hasn't got anything like enough money for private schools. So they thought, well, what about grammar schools? The boys are all 2 or 3 years ahead of their age. And he managed to secure an interview with Eton-on-Sea. Do you know where Eton-on-Sea is? Otherwise known as Colchester Grammar School. Now, actually, you're not allowed to interview for grammar schools because the boys are coming up 13, you see, so they missed the 11 plus. But Nick managed to get an interview at Colchester Grammar School. And they were shown around the school by the headmaster, who then said to the boys, "Haven't you got any questions?" And Max said, "Yeah, I'd like to know where you are on the chess league, and do you have competitive maths?" And the headmaster sort of swallowed slightly and said to Nick, "We'll have this child, definitely have this child." And then he looked at Jack, the pretty one, and said, "Haven't you got any And Jack had just been told he had to write a 20,000-word dissertation. That's the 13 plus these days. But he hadn't been told. He had a year to write it. I don't think Jack's ever written more than 1,000 words in his life. And his question was, how long are the breaks? And the headmaster looked at Nick and said, not this one, he could last 5 minutes in this school. And Nick's thinking, you have both of them or none of them. So the headmaster then said, perhaps they'd like to wander around the school with some prefects, and found a couple of prefects. And they wandered around the school, and Antonia and Nick were close behind them listening to what was going on. And the prefect eventually looked at them both and said, haven't you got any questions? And Max said, and what are you going to do when you leave this school? And he said, I'm going to go on the stage, can't you tell? And Nick was thinking, my children are definitely not coming to this school. And then they looked at Jack and said, haven't you got a question? And Jack didn't know that schools weren't mixed. He'd never been to a not mixed school in his life. And he said, you know, I've noticed there aren't any girls in this school. I really like girls. Don't you miss them? And you know what the boy said? This is not to be taken outside this room. He said, there's plenty of pretty boys in this school to keep us happy, thank you very much. We don't miss girls at all. And Nick said to Antonia, take the boy's hand and run. So my message to you is, those of you who haven't yet had children or grandchildren, if you're lucky enough to get them, take those headphones out of your ears and listen to the children. What they say is far more pertinent than anything you can say.